Even though the X-Men are finally joining the MCU, and in a very good way, I don't think the mutants on today's list are going to get the invite. Eyeboy is pretty self-explanatory. He's a student at the Jean Grey School who's a regular teenager who is literally covered with human eyeballs. So his body is about like 40 to 60% just little eyes, depending on who's drawing him. Which not only looks like something out of a Guillermo del Toro movie, but must make him incredibly ineffectual in the field. So one of his primary abilities is his enhanced vision, which sure can be used as microscopic vision, X-ray, thermal, and many other types of enhanced vision. And while Eyeboy has so many eyes to choose from, it does allow him to see from a lot of different angles. So how does this all apply? Well, he can examine micro-expressions, he can see body language up close, he can see other nonverbal cues, so he's really good at reading people psychologically. So yes, he does have a little bit of usefulness, but then when you add in the physical presence of all of his eyes, because that means he would also have eyes on the soles of his feet that he's walking on at all times, and also eyes in places you don't want eyes, like there's no way Eyeboy isn't constantly walking around with a migraine, or at least 2/3 of his eyes out of commission, because well, you could get dust in them, or clothes. So yeah, sure, he can see all of that, but when you combine that with like how he looks visually, I don't think he's making it to the big screen. So there isn't a lot to talk about when it comes to long neck. Look, I think he was supposed to be a joke, created by Grant Morrison and Phil Jimenez during their time on New X-Men, because his entire power set is really easy to explain. William Hanover had a neck that was slightly longer than usual, so he became Long Neck. Not to be confused with Jeannie Martin, who also had a really long neck and was a mutant. But that neck snapped under its own weight, which makes it kind of more interesting. Look, when your sole mutant power is having an abnormally large neck, you're not of much use to a creative team looking to come up with situations for a new team of superheroes. It's just not in the cards. I don't even think he'd be useful as like quick kill-off fodder. Think about it. If mutations hit around the same time as the onset of puberty, does that mean that Long Neck had a normal sized neck until he was like 13 and now he's like a giraffe? Or was he born with an abnormally long neck that just never stopped growing? The world may never have an answer to this enigma. Turns out, alongside many of Morrison's new X-Men, he was depowered by Scarlet Witch on M-Day. So we're assuming he's got a normal neck now. Don't come for me with that hook, I promise. Buried in the pages of John Morris's 2015 book, The League of Regrettable Heroes, half-baked heroes from comic book history, down among bizarre creations like Dr. Hormone, Fat Man the Human Flying Saucer, and Kangaroo Man, is a superhero born out of a licensing deal between Marvel Comics and the National Football League. His name is NFL Superpro, and if you've never heard about him, well, I think the NFL might be kind of happy. The alliance remains a lesson in how not to turn a licensed product into a sustainable comic book franchise. Look, sometimes corporate synergy is seamless, and sometimes it's not, and sometimes you get a mess like this. Born out of a very questionable desire to align the National Football League, so the NFL, with the considerably less popular comic book industry of the 90s, Phil Grayfield was technically a canonical superhero, even if he was like 87% ads. A former NFL player in his own right, Grayfield's career ended when he saved a young human from a terrible mishap and was injured in the process. So after that, he became a sports reporter and just so happened to be interviewing a genius chemist / sports memorabilia enthusiast when wrongdoers bust in. Grayfield accidentally knocked some special chemicals onto an already indestructible custom football uniform, and the combination transformed him into a superhero. So as Superpro, Grayfield was basically invulnerable, allowing him to literally tackle baddies by just running into them and knocking them over repeatedly. Despite these obvious limitations, Superpro managed team-ups with the likes of Spider-Man, and he was never expressly written out of continuity, so he could still be out there in the comics, but I don't think Marvel's gonna pay for the rights to bring him onto the big screen. There's not a lot to say about Ugly John, because he made, I think, a total of 2 appearances in Marvel Comics back at the turn of the century before biting the dust. Look, it's just kinda sad that his friends named him Ugly John, and his real name is just Steve. Get better friends, dude. Ugly John had 3 faces, which would make you think he had 6 eyes, but he actually only had 4 because his faces melded together. So his peripheral vision and smelling capabilities must have been amazing, but other than that, there's not a lot that you really want here and not a lot that you'd want to put on a big screen. So there are tons of superheroes who can fly, many who resemble birds, but there's only one guy who resembles birds and cannot fly. Unfortunately for Beak, he's a rather hideous bird person who can barely take flight at all. to the point of it being hardly worth mentioning. Functionally, he's a sad character who ends up in the remedial class, but he eventually gets the chance to spread his rather puny wings to take on the role of hero. Granted, he's not much more than an example of how a bad mutation can really make things bad. Prism is an interesting character with a rather impressive superpower. He can absorb and refract all forms of energy directed his way. Of course, the energy needs to be light-based, because if he's nailed with anything like kinetic energy, he shatters into a million pieces. So that's exactly what happened in a fight where Cyclops nailed him with his optic blasts. He deflected the energy without any problem, only to shatter when Jean Grey threw him against a wall. Fortunately, he's always being cloned, but every time he returns, it's not long before he's just a pile of brokenness one more time. At some point, the mutations on the roster in X-Men comics became an exercise in body horror, and no mutant is a better example of that mess than Maggot, which that's with 2 T's folks. A South African named Japheth, Maggot was a man with blue skin whose digestive system was comprised of 2 lung-sized techno-organic maggots. These maggots lived in his abdomen, and they could venture far away from Maggot while connected telepathically to him. This enabled them to read the past of any object they consumed, whether sentient or not. It's unclear how a mutation made several of his actual organs into machines, but hey, if we're gonna let Colossus get away with it, we'll have to forgive Maggot. But we're not going to be forgiving anybody for naming the maggots, because it's a bad joke. Eeny and meeny and miny, no. Living life with a perpetually clean slate was Forget-Me-Not's curse. No matter who he talked to or what he did, the second he was out of sight, he was out of mind. Videos erased themselves, conversations were forgotten. Forget-Me-Not was cursed as one of the most peculiar and obscure X-Men characters, the living embodiment of Schrodinger's cat. So once people took their eyes off of him, even for just a second, they forgot he existed. Completely. Now he and Professor Xavier discovered a psychic workaround where the professor created a psychic reminder that prompted him to recall the unfortunate mutant's existence, but this died with Xavier. So despite his powers' potential for villainy, Forget-Me-Not was always loyal and decent, and was cast as a hero in several rewritten stories, but everybody always forgets he's there. You don't want that in a movie. That's too much of a repetition. It doesn't matter how many self-aware jokes Brian Michael Bendis makes about Fabio Medina's mutant power set, it doesn't change the fact that all he can do is generate giant gold bouncy balls from nothing that make a ploink noise when they hit something. Yep, that's it. That's the whole thing. He creates a bunch of balls that are kind of in the way, but not an actual hindrance. So he came to be, I think, around 2013, and his mutant power really only creates an annoying obstacle for somebody, and then it goes away after a short period of time. Sure, he did get a chance to hang out with Miles Morales, so great for him, and he tries his hardest, but no, it's not gonna happen. Bailey Hoskins is a mutant who resided in the reality of Earth TRN-656 as opposed to the main continuity, and he was a nobody. Didn't stand out, wasn't special, didn't matter to anybody. And then one day they're like, hey, you're a mutant. What's his power? Well, it's a doozy. So Bailey can explode, but he can only explode once. He was essentially a human firework. But after that happened, there was no way he could ever regenerate. So he's just kind of sitting around waiting for that day where he's going to, I guess, willingly end his life, because that's going to be it for him. Well, that's all for today, folks. I've been Alexa. See ya!